Well, hi, everybody. This is Don Stewart, and welcome to episode 2 of the study of the rapture of the church. Now, on our previous episode, episode 1, we looked at what is the rapture of the church. We mentioned this series will be a basic introduction to the subject. We explained the difference between the rapture of the church and the second coming of Jesus Christ. And we said we're going to try and give a fair presentation when we go through all the different views, the strengths and weaknesses. There are 7 different views that good Bible believers hold. And I met people who've held every one of them, and they're good people. They love the Lord. They just have a difference of opinion on this particular subject. So godly people hold each of these. So if we disagree agreeably. Isaiah 1:18 says, "Come, let us reason together." So hopefully we can do that. And Proverbs 18:13 is a word to the wise from the Contemporary English Version. Says it's stupid and embarrassing to give an answer before you listen. So hopefully everyone listens to what we say, hears us out. And if you don't agree with us, that's fine. But it's probably a good idea to listen first to what we're going to say about this subject, because we're going to talk about it in great detail, give the strengths and weaknesses of each position, and why we believe pre-trib rapture is the best way of looking at this entire subject. All right, so let's look at question 2 now. Why should the study of the rapture, or the subject of the rapture, be studied? Before we begin our study of the rapture of the church, it's important that we explain why we should take the time to examine this particular subject. Aren't there more important things to spend our time with than studying about the rapture? Indeed, what does this particular topic have to do with the way that we conduct our daily lives? It's a very fair question. Well, there are those who believe the subject of the rapture of the church is irrelevant. Basically, it's something that is argued by theologians who endlessly argue these issues. Such is not the case. This is not the case at all. Now, we're going to make a number of observations why this subject should be studied by everyone. All right. Number 1, all scripture is profitable for study. First point we want to make, and we make this basically with all the various subjects we do here on Educating Our World, all scripture is profitable. So if the scripture deals with this subject, we should deal with it too. It's profitable or useful for us. The Apostle Paul wrote the following words to Timothy when he emphasized this fact in 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. He said, "All scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work." Notice, again, 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. And notice what he said. He said, all scripture, and that includes the topic of the rapture of the church. And since the teaching on this subject is part of Holy Scripture, and Holy Scripture is useful, all of it is useful, then this doctrine should be studied, seeing that it will be beneficial to us. And we'll see in a minute why it's going to be very beneficial to us. Okay, number 2, we should attempt to understand the plan of God. Here's the second reason why this is important. We should attempt to understand the plan of God. When Paul met the elders with the church at Ephesus in Acts chapter 20, verses 26 and 27, he commanded them to teach the whole will or the whole purpose or the plan of God. Here's what he said. "Therefore I testify to you this day that I am innocent of the blood of all, for I did not shrink back from declaring to you the whole purpose of God." That's Acts 20, verses 26 and 27. All right, since the topic of the rapture of the church is part of God's overall plan for the human race, it is then crucial that we have some understanding of it. All right, a third reason, this is a very important reason, the Apostle Paul made the subject a priority in his teaching. He was in Thessalonica for less than a month, but during that time, he taught them the subject of the rapture of the church. After writing to them about the final Antichrist, the coming temple, and the rapture of the church, he said this in 2 Thessalonians 2:5. "Don't you remember that when I was still with you, I was telling you these things?" So, and that's 2 Thessalonians 2:5. If the Apostle Paul thought it was important enough to teach this subject in the short time that he was with these believers, then we too should have the same attitude towards this topic. It is important. Now, number 4, of course, we want to know what was going to take place in the future. Point four, everyone wants to know what's going to happen in the future. Okay, we all would like to know that, right? So when we study the subject of the rapture of the church, we're going to have a clear picture as to what the scripture says will actually take place. There are a lot of different things, a lot of different topics that are going to come up, and it'll give us all a clearer picture of what the scripture truly says. So in other words, you and I will be intelligently informed about the coming events as predicted in the Bible. Now, number five, and this is a key one, there are practical reasons as to why. In addition to these points, there are also a number of practical reasons as to why this doctrine is important for us to study. Indeed, the position we hold concerning the timing of the rapture will determine the way in which we conduct our daily lives. In other words, we will have to make some decisions based upon our view of the timing of the rapture. You say, what do you mean? Well, this is our next point. We call it, how shall we live? Should we expect the return of Jesus Christ for believers at any moment? In other words, could he come at any moment, an imminent coming of Christ? Or should we expect to endure years of terrible events before Christ comes back, as recorded in Revelation 6 through 18? In other words, if we are going to experience some of these events, then how should we prepare ourselves for this coming great tribulation? Now, if we believe the rapture can occur at any moment, then we will live in an expectancy of that event. However, if a number of events must take place before the rapture of the church occurs, then we will be looking for those things to happen. We won't be looking for the coming of Christ. We'll be looking for certain events to take place before the coming of Christ. So we will not be looking for the immediate return of the Lord. So as we see, our understanding of the timing of the rapture has enormous implications on how we'll conduct our daily lives and prepare for the future. So to sum up, we acknowledge that the subject of the rapture is not the most important issue which a person can examine. We have said that already, but neither is it irrelevant. In fact, there's a number of excellent reasons as to why we should take the time to look at this very relevant subject, and this is what this series is attempting to do. All right, so let's summarize question 2 for you. Why should the subject of the rapture be studied? There are a number of reasons as to why we should engage in studying the subject of the rapture of the church. First and foremost, it's part of Holy Scripture. All Scripture is useful and profitable to us, so we should make this a part of our overall study of the Bible. Number 2, God gave us an outline of his plan for time and eternity, and the rapture of the church is part of that plan. Therefore, it is worth our time to investigate what he said about it. Now, we also find that the Apostle Paul made this subject a priority in his teaching, since he thought it's something that's important to address, again, at the very outset of the Christian era, then so should we. Moreover, this particular study can give us assurance about our own future. We can know what is going to take place because the Bible tells us, and we're going to be emphasizing this. And finally, there are a number of practical reasons as to why this subject is important. Indeed, if we believe that we're meant to go through the Great Tribulation period, then we better start preparing for it. At least if we're going to, even some part of it, we have to prepare for that eventuality. However, if we believe Christ can come back at any moment, then we're going to live our lives with an expectancy of looking for him at any time, with this truth always in mind, and an urgency to get the gospel out to people while we are still here. And that's the key. There's an urgency. If we, like when we believe the pre-trib view, that if he can come at any moment, we want to get the gospel out while we are still here. Well, as can be seen, there's numerous reasons as to why we should take the time and study the subject of the rapture of the church. So that's question number 2. Now, question number 3 is going to give us some specific truths about the rapture from Scripture. It goes like this. What specific truths do we learn about the rapture from Scripture? We won't get it all done in this episode, but we're going to tell you what the Scripture has to say about this issue. There are 3 main passages that teach the doctrine of the rapture of the church. John 14, 1-3, 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 18, and 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 50 to 58. Now, while other passages possibly speak of this event, they don't provide direct references to it. So we're safe with these 3 particular passages. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at these 3 passages, John 14, 1 Thessalonians 4, and 1 Corinthians 15, and then compare what they teach and put together a number of specific things that we can conclude about this event as well as its meaning for us. So what we're going to find out, there's at least 14 different things when we compare these passages together, which we learn about the rapture of the church from a study of these verses. All right, so let's go through them. Number one, first and foremost, the Lord does not want us to be uninformed of these truths about the rapture. Now, with respect to the rapture of the church, first and foremost, we find that the Lord wants us to know certain things about this important truth. Listen to what Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. First Thessalonians was possibly, we mentioned this before, the first New Testament book that was composed, first letter of Paul about 20 years after the death and resurrection of Christ. Anyway, in 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 13, he said, "Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you will do not grieve like the rest who have no hope." 1 Thessalonians 4:13. Now, this is essential for us to understand. Paul made the point that he did not want these Thessalonian believers to be uninformed about the truth. Some translations say we don't want you to be ignorant. It's the same idea. Uninformed is kind of a nicer word, but it's still idea. He assumes that that they were ignorant, they were uninformed, but he also assumes that they could know certain things about this coming event, and this is crucial. Although they were seemingly uninformed of what's going on or ignorant, he also assumed that they could know certain things, and he's going to teach them certain things. So, like the Thessalonians, we should not be uninformed of the truths regarding the rapture of the church. Now, in the immediate context of 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul did not want them to be uninformed about the fate of believers who had died. He's going to now instruct them as to what happened to these people. The Thessalonians would learn that these deceased believers were not at a disadvantage because of their death. So the question was, they died before the coming of the Lord. Are they at a disadvantage to those who are alive? And Paul says, no, not at all. So in doing so, he emphasized that their grief over the loss of loved ones is different from the grief of unbelievers. Non-Christians don't have any hope whatsoever, none. Those who have died believing in Jesus Christ have hope. We are allowed to experience sorrow. In fact, we're told that godly people mourn for the first martyr of the Christian church, Stephen, when they buried him, because it is a loss. Death is a loss. It's a loss to us. But we should not be sorrowful as those who have no genuine hope for the future. And that's the difference between Christians and non-Christians. Okay, so the first point is he doesn't want us to be uninformed, so he's going to inform us, and we should be able to understand certain things. All right, number two, this truth of the rapture is given by the word of the Lord. Now, this is very important here. Paul says that the doctrine of the rapture of the church was something he taught by the word of the Lord. 1 Thessalonians 4:15. "For this we tell you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord shall in no way precede those who are asleep." 1 Thessalonians 4:15. This stresses the divine authority of this doctrine. The fact that Paul emphasized that this teaching comes from the word of the Lord gives further importance to what he wrote. Now, exactly what this phrase, the word of the Lord, means is not known. There have been several suggestions. One suggestion is this is Jesus' teaching in the Olivet Discourse. The Olivet Discourse is Matthew basically 24 and 25, when Jesus was speaking on the Mount of Olives, answering the questions about the end of the age. Some people believe that Paul is referring to that, and there are people who argue that you find the rapture of the church in the Olivet Discourse. I don't believe that's true. I think you find little or nothing about that in the Olivet Discourse, but it doesn't seem to be what Paul is speaking about here. Now, there's another possibility that people raise, and that is it is a teaching of Jesus that is not recorded in the New Testament. Now, some argue that this doctrine was taught by Jesus in more detail, but for some reason, his words were not recorded in the New Testament. However, this certainly does not seem likely, given the fact that Paul states that he was the one to whom this truth was first fully revealed, rather than to Jesus' 12 disciples. So that seems to rule out that idea. Now, the best answer seems to be this was a direct revelation given to the Apostle Paul. More likely is the idea that Paul received this truth by direct revelation. In other words, the exact details were basically unknown to the believers until the time God revealed them to Paul, and then he reveals them to us. And this seems to be the best answer. So that means that when we look at the four Gospels, we should not expect to find any teaching by Jesus except the reference in John 14 of the rapture of the church, because he was waiting, for the Apostle Paul to come along once Jesus, in context, he had to die, come back from the dead, ascend into heaven, start getting the message out to the entire world of the good news of Jesus Christ. It is only then that this was revealed to Paul to put all these things into proper perspective and proper context. So this is stressed by the apostle. The doctrine is God's truth, whatever the word of the Lord means there. All right, number 3, Jesus has promised to return for his own. The rapture doctrine provides further details concerning the promise of Jesus to his disciples. From the words of Jesus on the night of his betrayal, we find the promise of his return. The Lord said that he would bring those who belong to him, that is, the Christians, back to himself. John records the following in the first 3 verses of John 14. We'll read verses 2 and 3 of John 14 here. He said, "My Father's house," this is Jesus speaking, "has plenty of room. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am." John 14, 2 and 3. Now, though Jesus said that he was going to go away from them, he also said that a place was being prepared for these disciples. Thus, Jesus promised to return someday for those who are his. At his return, Jesus would take these believers to be with him in his Father's house. Now, this is the great truth that Christians have held on to for the last 2,000 years, that when we die, we're immediately with Jesus, and there's going to come a time when he's going to come and take the living believers to be with him. The key is we're going to be with Jesus wherever he is. Some people say, where's heaven? Well, heaven's wherever Jesus is. That's where we want to be. And so this is what what Jesus is saying here. Now, however, even though Jesus mentioned this, the specific details were not given by Jesus at this time. This would be the job of the Apostle Paul. So number 4, this is a mystery or sacred secret which was never before revealed. We learn that this doctrine of the rapture of the church was first revealed to the Apostle Paul. He wrote in 1 Corinthians 15:51, "Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed." Now, the doctrine of the rapture of the church is a mystery. Now, in this context, it doesn't mean that it's something that's difficult to comprehend. It refers to a sacred secret. In other words, there was no divine revelation of the rapture of the church to the people before Paul unveiled it. Nothing was written previously about it when he said this to the Thessalonians, and now then he further explained it to the Corinthians, as we just read, 1 Corinthians 15. So he reveals it first to the Thessalonians, and 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18, and soon thereafter the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians 15, 50 to 58. So the point is, what Paul is saying here is this is something that has never been previously revealed. But now, because of where we're at, remember progressive revelation, God doesn't reveal everything at once. You had to have Jesus die for the sins of the world, come back from the dead, appear to people for 40 days, ascend into heaven, send the disciples out to preach the gospel, and then to explain his second coming and all the events with respect to that. And so that is what Paul is telling us here. There's something he's going to fill in the gaps, as it were, that Jesus didn't reveal. And now that's his job, what he's doing, his responsibility. So the truths were given to Paul to reveal. Therefore, we should not look for the doctrine of the rapture in the Old Testament, or for that matter, even highlight it in the teachings of Jesus. When Jesus talked about coming for his own, he did not elaborate on these truths. It's very important for us to understand. This responsibility was given to the Apostle Paul. All right, we're already out of time here for this episode of the Rapture of the Church, episode number 2. Again, we want to remind you, if you haven't done this, please subscribe to our YouTube account. There's a little button there that you can subscribe, and you can get alerts when we have a new episode coming out, because we have episodes coming out on various subjects all the time. And remember, on our website, Educating Our World, the entire book, on the rapture is there for a free download. We have a second book there, The Pre-Trib Rapture Defended, that you can download for free. Read about what we say, read ahead, because we go into great detail explaining why we believe what we believe on this subject. It's a very important subject, and it's a subject that should be studied. So until we meet again next time, I'm Don Stewart saying thank you so much for watching this video and the other ones, and may the Lord richly, richly bless.